Matthew chapter 12, verse 25. And Yahushua knew their thoughts and said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. I want to start by giving all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Makakodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone who taught me this truth, and peace and citations to, the rest of the Akim out there pushing this truth. Shalom. Right? The reason I read this here in Matthew chapter 12, verse 25, is pretty much to do with Esau's kingdom. Right? The Western powers, the so-called Western powers, are divided, with respect to this Iran war, this U.S.-Israel-Iran war. There have been other, topics of division, Trump wanting to leave NATO, Trump wanting to seize Greenland, Trump wanting to add tariffs to European and Canadian imports, So many different things, in such a short period of time has come up, that's causing more and more divisions. And now we see another example, with the European stance on the war in Iran. I wanted to just read a few headlines. All I did was just Google Spain, Israel. And if you've been keeping up with current events, you'll know that, Spain is speaking out significantly against, Israel, specifically Israel, right? It says, rearm morally. Spain's Sanchez calls on Europe to cut Israel agreement, right? Israel reprimands Spanish diplomat after Netanyahu effigy blown up in Spain. After kicking Spain out of the ceasefire center, Netanyahu promises that countries opposing Israel will pay immediate price. U.S. Israel removes Spain from CMCC over anti-Israel bias. Right? Spain ramps up criticisms of Israel, U.S. defying Trump's threat. Right? So this is another example, of the division, among, Esau. We read it again, Matthew 12, verse 25, and Yahushua knew their thoughts and said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. Right? Which is why you're seeing, this strain between the U.S. and its allies. Right? This headline says, EU foreign policy chief says Israeli moves put U.S.-Iran ceasefire under severe strain, because there was a ceasefire agreement, a 2-week ceasefire agreement between the U.S. and Iran. And that very same day, or I believe it was the next day, but, shortly after the agreement was made, Israel started to bomb Lebanon, right? And then, of course, this was a few weeks back. Nobody wants to join U.S.-Israeli-Iran war, says EU foreign policy chief, right? So this is a direct fulfillment, of Daniel chapter 2 and verse 41, right? Which Daniel chapter 2 described, the different beasts or kingdom that would rule, before the Lord will translate the kingdom to the Israelites, right? And it started with the current one that was there now in the time of Daniel, which was the Babylonian, and then it went on to the Medo-Persian, then the Greeks, then the Romans, right? And then after that, the revival of the Roman Empire, which is what we're in right now. So I'll read Daniel chapter 2, verse 41. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, right? And that kingdom right now is represented by the EU and NATO. That's the alliance that rules right now, and Israel is also a part of that by virtue of them being by virtue of America being their greatest ally. But now that truce is getting divided, because Israel was also established by a European power. It was established by the UK, right? But it says, but there shall be in it the strength of iron, which is NATO, which is largely headed by America. For as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron, part of clay, so shall the kingdom be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest the iron mixed with marley clay, they shall mingle themselves with seed of men, but shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Right? And he says, in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So that's why we so closely follow these prophecies, because we know that we're in the final leg of this beast, that this statue that was seen in Daniel's vision. This is the final beast, the final kingdom to rule, right? And it's coming to an end. And as it comes to an end, the Heavenly Father is going to set up the kingdom of heaven, headed by Yahweh Shai and the 12 apostles, the head of which will be King David, right? So that's why we bring out these news, right? Revelation chapter 17, verse 16, the 10 horns, right, which are the EU NATO nations, excluding America and Canada, right? The 10 original nations that started the EU, right? They're going to hate the whore, which shall charge upon the beast. These shall hate the whore, which is America, Mystery Babylon the Great, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And that's thermonuclear fire. And the reason why that will happen, one, first and foremost, is to fulfill the prophecies of the Lord. And how that is happening, right, is through these different geopolitical rifts, right, that are opening up between these allies. For God has put it in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and to give their kingdom unto the beast until the words of God be fulfilled. And the words of God are also written in that concerning this in Daniel chapter 2, right? Where that kingdom is going to be divided and destroyed. As Yahweh Shai himself said, no kingdom that is divided against itself can stand. So hopefully, this is a short lesson. This was edifying. Until next time, Shalom.